award-winning journalist and Middle East expert Mona Eltahawy is joining us with some of her insights and providing some context, and she is in New York by Skype. So, Mona Eltahawy, if we assume that it's true that the Libyan Air Force have fired on protesters in Tripoli, what does that tell you? Is this the convulsion of a desperate regime on the verge of collapse, or is it possible that this escalation might crush the protest movement?
Well, Nancy, I think that it's the former. I think that the Libyan regime realizes that for the first time in its 42-year kind of rule of tyranny, Libyans have been inspired by the revolution in Tunisia and in Egypt and are determined to end the brutal dictatorship of Muammar Gaddafi. Remember that this is a regime that in the 1980s showed live on television public hangings of people who dared to stand up to it. Muammar Gaddafi has ruled with a brutality that is unprecedented in the region. And hearing what's been happening in Benghazi and now in Tripoli, I can only watch and listen in awe at the courage of Libyans. Because although in Egypt, my country of birth, we feared the worst when Hosni Mubarak's regime shut down the internet and put the country under an information lockdown. The worst didn't happen, thank God. We had about 300 people who died in 18 days. More than 500 people have died in Libya over the past 6 days. It's outrageous.
Beyond that, we are hearing another report of 2 fighter aircraft jets and pilots from Libya landing in Malta with the pilots saying they are defecting. Again, we can't confirm any of this, but how telltale is that for you? Does it even look like discipline, such as it is within the Libyan military, is starting to erode in a serious manner? In fact, everyone is abandoning Gaddafi.
Yeah, it sounds like everyone is jumping this sinking ship, which is why I was saying I agreed with your first point about how this is a regime that is desperate and trying to cling on. Because besides those 2 unconfirmed reports about the defections, we've heard of a series of ambassadors and diplomats who have all resigned. There was even a report of the justice minister who was also stepping down. And these are all officials who surely have known all along of the brutality of Gaddafi. But now they realize just, the mass scale of that brutality. And I'm hoping that we see more people jump ship. And I'm hoping that we see, it's very difficult to get information, as we've heard through the news reports. But I'm hoping that we see more official condemnation from Western countries especially. They should feel ashamed of the business and oil deals they've had with the Gaddafi regime, because they have essentially sold out the Libyan people's rights in return for oil and business. I mean, even Canada has, Petro-Canada signed a 30-year contract with the Libyans. Almost every country that relies on oil in the West is implicated in this brutality.
Now, I want to talk about another report that has surfaced and been debunked both in Venezuela and in Brussels, and that has to do with the rumor that Muammar Gaddafi himself has fled to Venezuela. Even though that has now been denied, the fact that Gaddafi's son was the one who came forward to speak to the nation seemed telltale to me in some way. Why wouldn't Gaddafi himself speak to the nation if he wants to be defiant?
It's a great question, Nancy, because we saw with Tunisia, the Tunisian dictator Zain al-Abidine Ben Ali gave 3 speeches and then he fled. Same in Egypt, Hosni Mubarak gave 3 speeches and then he was toppled. So I don't know if Gaddafi is trying to stave off that kind of pattern, because this is what people have been saying. And I don't know if he wanted to present to the world the face of his son, who was rumored to be groomed to basically inherit Libya, because Saif al-Islam Gaddafi was always presented as the quote-unquote reformist face of the regime, which was total and absolute rubbish, of course, because what he has kind of traditionally done is he plays the good cop to the Gaddafi regime's bad cop. But what we saw yesterday was basically the total bad cop, because he ended that speech by saying we will fight until the last man, woman, and bullet. So even he, this kind of traditional good cop, has shown the ugly face of this regime. It's impossible, obviously, to verify where Gaddafi is right now, but I'm sure that he knows that his days are numbered, because this is a brave, courageous, unprecedented uprising, and I'm sure the Libyans will get rid of him in the way that Tunisians and Egyptians got rid of their dictators.
And when you heard Gaddafi's son say in the speech that the country risks lurching into civil war if it continues with the protests, is there any way that what we're seeing could ever be described as a civil war? Is there a risk that the country could be caught up in a civil war?
No, what Saif al-Islam Gaddafi was trying to do, Nancy, is exactly what Zain al-Abidin Ben Ali and Hosni Mubarak did, which is basically present himself and the regime as the only guarantors of stability. And that if they fall, chaos will ensue. Whereas, in fact, we're seeing chaos by the regime itself on a much greater level than the Egyptian regime, Mubarak's regime, unleashed on Egyptians. So I don't think civil war is at hand at all. I'm hearing more and more tribes joining the people against Gaddafi, and I'm sure they will topple him.
Okay, we'll watch all developments very, very closely. I'm sure you will too. Mona, good to talk to you. Thanks very much for this. Journalist and Mideast expert Mona Eltahawy joining us from New York.